Friend asked me today to record this series. I've just received a batch of new brass 338 Winchester Magnum, and he asked me to record a few video snips for him and maybe others to view on the steps that I go through for working up a new load. So this rifle is new to me. This brass is actually factory new. It's a Remington Peters 338 Winchester Magnum. It just arrived today. So I'm starting with the very first step. I counted on my fingers and toes, and I came up with roughly 9 steps that I'm going to go through. The first, what I'm going to do is, in the manufacturing of this brass, the flash hole that you can see through, there is a burr on the inside of pretty much every case. I've done many different cases, and I've found a burr on every one. What this does is remove the burr internally from that hole from the inside of the case. And I also look at the outside of the case to make sure that that there's not a burr there. Obviously, a burr on this side would inhibit the primer from seating, and you don't want that. The tool that I use for this is from RCBS, and I've already got it aligned in one case. I'll show you what comes out of it, and then I'll show you the tool. So the method that I'm going to use might be kind of tough with 2 hands. I need 3 hands for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this tool 2 or 3 turns, and then I'll show you the shavings that come out of it. I'm not going to be able to show you turning the tool, but I guess you can understand what I've done. I've actually lined it up, and the tip of the tool is just coming through the flash hole at this point. The tool is resting on the burr that's on the inside of the case. Alright, so I turned the tool maybe 3 or 4 times. I'm going to tip the case up and let you see what falls out of it. I think you can see the sparkles falling out of it. So what that does is possibly nothing, but you know, it just cannot be good for consistency to have the primer firing maybe to the left, maybe down the middle, or maybe off to the side. What this does is make a uniform ignition of the powder. What I also do is look at the back side of the case. As I mentioned, if this hole has any burrs on it, that gets deburred as well. So I'll show you a close-up of the tool. The tool, if I can get it in view, let's see if it'll focus. It just is a chamfer tool. It cuts a slight chamfer, and more importantly, it removes any burr on the inside of the case. Okay, so I've got 3 cases we'll use to set up this full-length sizing die. The first thing that I did was raise the ram with the shell holder in it and screwed the die clockwise until I touched the shell holder. Now, dies set up differently. I'd encourage you to read the directions that came with your dies. One way that always works is run it down till it touches, back it up 1 turn, and then what we'll do is we'll use this measuring device, and we'll gradually go downward until it gets to the right depth. So what I've done is put a bit of case lube on this particular case. We'll use it first. I use a Hornady wax. It doesn't take much. I just put a little bit on my finger and ran all the way up the case. You don't want to get much lube on the shoulder area. If you're sizing cases and you notice dents appearing in your cases, that's because of lube being trapped, and actually the air that gets trapped between the lube and the case will dent the case. So you know, they'll pop back out when you shoot, but it doesn't look very attractive. So the first thing we're going to do is put this case in the press. It's already been lubed. Again, 3 hands might work better here. Oh, and I've also marked the case neck with a Sharpie. So when we pull this case out, we should be able to see how far the die is sizing the case. Oh, that is really tight. I'm gonna have to look at this. So this is the first time I've used this die set. What I did was remove the decapping assembly. Thought I'd show you that. It's just a threaded rod with the decapper on the very end. What I'm doing is I'm miking this ball. What this ball does is it expands the case, and then it enters down into the case, and then when you remove the handle or pull the handle back up on the press, this is the last thing that pulls out of the case, and it gives you the proper neck tension. So I should be reading something around 337 thousandths on that. And you can see this mic, it may have moved a little bit. It is currently at 325, 335, that seems like that's awful big. I believe the mic has moved. Oh, it's 325, 335, and then 36, 37, not quite 338. So that's about right, maybe 337, and you can use these hash marks to see what the fourth decimal place is. But I'd say just a guess here, this is reading 0.337 and maybe 3/10. So it is smaller than the bullet. It provides neck tension, and more importantly, I was afraid this might have been a 30 caliber expander ball, but it looks like it's the correct size. So I've got to investigate further on why the case does not want to go into this die body. So just to wrap up sizing, this is a full length sizer. You may be able to see in the video this black. What I'm going to do is, since these are new cases, I'm only interested in cleaning up this. As you can see, there's a large dent on that case, and you'll see that it moves because this black Sharpie line will change. So a lot of resistance removing that dent, and you can see maybe that the case was sized down to the shoulder. So on cases that have been fired, what I would do is use this tool and set my die to move this shoulder back maybe 0.02 of an inch, and that's sizing the case. Another technique is neck sizing. The only difference there is it will make your brass possibly last longer, possibly provide more accuracy, in that this part of the case is not sized, only the neck and shoulder is put back to book dimensions. The next step after sizing is to take off the lubricant. I just use a cotton cloth and wipe off the lubricant that was used for sizing. So the next step, you have to have a reference book. What we're going to look at is at the overall length of the case, and I'm using a Hornady book. So for this cartridge, 338 Magnum, it gives me a maximum length of 2.5 inches, 2.500, and then trim them, if you do trim them, back to 2.490. So using a set of outside calipers, and check a couple of cases. Now again, this is new brass. So this measures 2.495. .490, which was the trim to length. 2.491. So This brass, at least 3 samples out of the brass, and I can tell that the manufacturer has cut these to length. They're fairly consistent. They're also measuring above the minimum and well below the maximum. So what I'm going to choose to do with these is to not trim them. I'll probably look at them after the 2nd or 3rd firing and make sure this overall length is not growing. The way you trim them is you put them in a machine that just cuts this outer neck, and it reduces it back. But it also leaves a burr, and I can tell on these there is a burr. So this is a tool made by RCBS. All the manufacturers of reloading equipment have this tool in some version. What I'm going to do is deburr the case mouth on the inside and on the outside, and what that'll do is get rid of any sharp edges. It also puts a slight chamfer on the case, so that cleans that up. Just a couple of turns gets rid of all the burrs. And you can see that it actually is removing material. When you're done, you should have a totally clean case in and out. So this is the final step that will end what I call case preparation, getting your cases ready to load. So what we've gone over, even though I didn't need to do it on these cases, brand new cases, is first thing is to clean the cases. You want to get all the dirt and residue off. They make tumbler medias. They're liquid ways of getting the dirt off. The second step that we went over is to deburr the inside of the flash hole, the inside of this hole. You only have to do that one time on new cases and never have to do it again. The third step is to full length size. We use this press and a particular die. In this case, we did not have to size the entire body, but but we did want to get the case mouth area down to the shoulder sized properly. After you do that, in the same operation, you knock out the old primer. So this tool has 2 ends on it. It has a large end and a small end. For these large cases, you just stick that in there and you get out the gunk. You don't have to do that every time, but maybe every 3rd time that you reload a case. The next step that we did is we had lubricant on these cases. You want to get that off. I just used an old shop towel to get that off. And the next thing that we would do is we looked in our book and looked at the maximum overall length that the case could be. In this case is 2.5 inches and the minimum is 2.490. We found that all of these cases fell well below the maximum. So I did not trim the case to length, but what you would do is there's a tool that has a cutter that would move the shoulder or the case mouth back and get the overall length correct. When you use that tool, it produces a burr, and these cases did have a burr, so I chamfered the inside. So that's where we are now. So there's one last step of case preparation. Depending on what type of bullet you're going to load, this is a cast bullet, and obviously this is a jacketed bullet. If you're using a cast bullet, the last operation is the very tip of this case has to be flared open slightly. And what that does is as the bullet is seated into the case, you can see this one will not start in the case now. And that's because the case mouth is actually a little bit smaller than the diameter of the bullet. What you're doing is you're flaring the mouth so that as the bullet is seated, it will not shave off the soft lid. Now in the case of a jacketed bullet, and this one a boat tail to boot, you already have a nice lead-in chamfer, so there's no way that bullet will be damaged. So depending on what bullet you are going to use, you may or may not have to do this step. What I use for this step is what's called a Lyman neck expanding M die, and in this die there's a stepped plug. This section of the plug is the diameter of the case, the mouth inside, and then there's a bump out that bumps out maybe 0.010 of an inch per side, and when that goes into the case just slightly, that actually flares out the mouth. So I've got a case that I'm going to run in and show you. This is the one that the bullet would not start in to begin with. Alright, so now it's contacted that plug. Now it's contacted the section in the die that will expand the very tip of the mouth. And you cannot see it, I imagine, on camera, but I can feel the very tip of this mouth is bailed out. So if I try that same bullet to get it started, it barely starts now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little bit deeper with that die and make the case mouth bail out further. So now when I try the bullet, you can see that it starts just fine. Now that did not change any more than the top, maybe 1/16 of an inch. All of this case neck is totally sized correctly. What we will do when we seat the bullets is we'll use a little bit of what's called a crimp, and we'll crimp that back into the bullet to make the case neck straight again. So that's the end of case preparation. The next section will actually be loading the ammunition with new components.